This podcast is brought to you by Wondershare Filmora 14. Support Moore's Law is Dead by downloading it for free through the link in the description. And then it is also supported by CDkeyoffer.com. Use offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% on all Microsoft software. And we'll talk about these sponsors more later. But for now, let's just get on with the show. And welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today I have the pleasure of being joined by someone who joined us, I want to say a year ago, maybe over a year ago. I think over a year ago. And this is somebody who, I guess actually just let me get this matter of business out of the way first. This is an anonymous person that works at Intel. This person's thoughts are their own, not of Intel's or any other entity. We're not going to confirm exactly where this person works at Intel, nor in the past where they've worked there, where they work now. And I'm just going to confirm that this person worked directly on a lot of important architectures. When they say they know something, they really do know something. You know, it wasn't someone that just works on a specific aspect of it. This is a person that built things for this company. And additionally, they were okay to speak with me. The last time this person was on, I actually found it, well, both annoying and amusing that people were like, well, this person is using their voice. Now they're going to get fired or blah, blah, blah. It's like, first of all, this person talked to their supervisor. Second of all, this person doesn't need to be anonymous. They just choose to. Actually, almost every guest that has been anonymous on Broken Silicon, it's just for personal reasons. And so they're free to speak freely. They've been okay to speak, and they know they're using their real voice. We're not stupid. So, but please, yes, introduce yourself as much as you can or want to.
This is an anonymous Intel engineer. I was recruited out of college, and I got to have a very exciting many years at Intel. But obviously, with the situation, a lot of things are going on at Intel, a lot of disappointments as well. But it's been a good ride, and I guess I'll speak into more opinions about where I think the company is headed and things like that in the future more later. But I am generally not just passionate about the company. Obviously, that I could certainly find myself working at like AMD or NVIDIA or Qualcomm just as much as I would at Intel. It just the fate had me here, but I am looking forward to see where this goes. Yeah.
So I think this is a good question to start with. Gian Violi writes in and he says, hello, Tom and anonymous Intel engineer. What do you think is Intel's biggest opportunity at the moment? And also, though, its biggest concern?
Yeah, the biggest opportunities of Intel from how I see it is still the potential of external foundries. Both Intel's one of the 3 companies in the world with the bleeding edge node, and so with both with advanced manufacturing nodes and packaging, and regaining and maintaining market share in the CPU with improvements in margins as better, more economically designed products come in to the market in the future by Intel. And I think we have pretty good opportunities in coming out in AI inference. So I'm going to separate the AI inference silicon versus AI training. Mm-hmm. I've seen analysis that I know the AI training, which is primarily driven by GPUs or specialized silicon, they are all the rage right now. But I've seen analysis that over in the late 2020s and into the 2030s, And there are certainly other opportunities as well from edge computing, autonomous vehicles, and whatnot. But due to the situation Intel is currently in, business and financially wise, I think their biggest opportunities are just nailing down the core fundamental business opportunities, making economical, highly competitive products in their CPU markets, both in the data centers and in the client, and going for their strengths rather than trying to catch up on their weak areas. Which I think I'm gonna talk about concerns. I think there are many. Getting distracted and chasing the GPU and AI training silicon, I think that's one of the biggest concerns. I think Pat and top executives know by now that it's sort of too late to.
I hope they do.
It's sort of too late to catch up to NVIDIA and AMD on these areas, but I think Pat has a hard time trying to let that go. So how to scale that in I'm not saying Intel should just stop GPU development completely, but how to scale that and frame that in a way. Otherwise, we may lose out on fostering our strengths while trying to invest our dwindling resources on trying to catch up with to things that may not materialize. Always the biggest concern is, increased competition from TSMC, AMD, NVIDIA, and ARM. They're both on the design side from AMD and NVIDIA. Now, one of the biggest concern is cultural damage, and exiting above to top talent is another, because of a lot of optimism has been lost within. I think engineers, rank and file engineers at Intel sort of knew where the trend line was from 2020. I would like to say 2018, 2019 or so, and certainly by 2021. But there was a lot of cautious optimism that Intel will be a leading computing semiconductor company again. And a lot of that has been dwindled.
Well, actually, I want to speak to that, because when I was at Hot Chips in 2019, I agree. There was an air of optimism around the people at Intel that I spoke to in person there. It really was cautious, but it was there. They were optimistic. There was exuberance for AMD and NVIDIA people, I would say. But now, speaking to people at Intel, it's almost always not optimism. I mean, we'll talk about that later, but leading up to the Arrow Lake launch, a product that used to have a lot of optimism, man, some people I talked to were like really down, and I think we know why they were now. But I almost wonder if Intel should have had been worried, concerned, and depressed in 2019, and now they should have the cautious optimism, because the time to be worried was before the last leg on the chair breaks. Like, you don't want to be cautiously optimistic and let this optimism lead you to thinking, like it's almost like Zen 2 was a cancer scare for Intel. And I'm concerned that they looked at that scare and they went, oh, well, that means I don't need to worry about cancer.
Right. Yeah.
When they should have been making lifestyle changes, they should have been going, oh, well, I almost got it, but they caught it early. And they just seem to just like walk out of the hospital and open up that pack of cigarettes. That's my impression. And, I think GPU, I agree, was a big part of that. They just assumed they're going to beat, let's forget AMD, NVIDIA, the first try, or I guess second try. But and now let's go there, because I actually want to touch on everything you brought up. But when it comes to GPU, I just think I agree, and I've said this publicly many, many times. I don't think Intel should completely gut all GPU unless but you can't trust NVIDIA unless they're just ready to buy NVIDIA tiles. Frankly, I think short term that'd be a huge commercial success, actually. If like you had a Panther Lake chip with an NVIDIA tile for GPU in it, I think that'd do very well. But would NVIDIA give it to them right away, especially when NVIDIA is working on CPUs now? And would you trust NVIDIA? I don't know. Like maybe they just do that short term to make sure Intel's GPU department goes to crap, and then the second they're completely dependent on Nvidia, they would just, Jensen.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah.
Jack up prices and go, well, you don't even make GPUs anymore. So who else are you going to go to? AMD. Although I guess they could go to ARM or Qualcomm for a GPU tie if they wanted to. But but at the same time, I think what they need to do is just launch like a 128-bit GPU every 2 years that tries to compete at the $200 to $300 mark.
Right in the low mid range, where
low end even.
And there's some business opportunities there, like if the GPUs are competitive enough, yeah.
Because just to warn people, like, and I don't know how much about this but I've been told recently that pretty much what I said in that Intel Arc is canceled leak, 2 years ago now. In that leak, I said, I think Battlemage will still launch, but it's probably going to be like a tile and 1 or 2 low-end dies, and Celestial looks like all high-end's axed. And from what I'm hearing, that seems basically true. Like if you were to compare, again, this is what I hear though. I mean, what I've heard things about Arrow Lake, and it was below the performance expectations. So let's remember, Battlemage could not live up to what I've been told. That is not that rare at Intel. But what I've heard is like, yeah, there's a really low end die, and there's a die that might compete with like this year's mid range or the lower end of this year's mid range. That's really what Alchemist did, though, right? That competed with the previous gen's mid range, pretty much. Because I consider the 6600, for example, to be low end. I'm sorry, it's a tiny die.
Right. The difference now is Alchemist was the first vehicle, and the original plan was to compete throughout the stack between mid and high range with the Battlemage, Celestial, etc. And now it's scaled back considerably. Yeah.
For Alchemist, there were some people that told me they thought it might compete with a 3080. Like they thought the word they used is hopefully beating 3070 Ti, which beating 3070 Ti, that puts you in a stone's throw from the 3080. That's what they were hoping for. And in reality, they kind of got to half that performance.
Right. Yeah. I think it might do okay against 3060 Ti now. I don't know, after a year plus of driver updates and whatever. I don't even know what the numbers are right now with the Alchemist A77. Yeah.
You're talking about a card that's cut down and using an 8 nanometer node versus 6 nanometer, like at least a node behind, maybe a node and a half behind. I think what you're about to say, though, too, is at least Battlemage isn't pretending it's going to compete with the 4080 or the 5080, right? It knows it won't do that. And so I guess am I wrong? What you were going to say is at least that single sub, it wouldn't be as much of a failure if it only did what they expected it to do, even if that's still basically the same tier of performance.
Yeah, I'll generally say that. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think even that is, going back to the main reason we brought up GPU, or you did, I believe, is I think even trying to compete with like the 4070, which maybe, but again, anyone who says that's impressive, yeah, but the 4070 is going to be, that performance will be a tier or two lower in performance by the time Battlemage comes out, if it does, which I think it will. But so that's still basically the same place it was in. It just seems like that. How would they ever catch up, though, right? NVIDIA is going to go with another 50% performance increase, I think, around there, or some, maybe a little better, maybe a little worse with the if they do the full die, it would be at least 50%. I just don't think they're going to give us that with the 5090. And as much as AMD is not competing in the high end, it's like, yeah, but they are, it seems, about to launch a card with half the die size of the 7900 XTX with similar performance. So they're still giving you that performance uplift. They're just not giving you it at the top end now. Right. And it seems like Battlemage, from the sounds of it, I mean, I don't know. It seems like it's not really pushing the performance tier up as high as NVIDIA or AMD are. So I just feel like I don't know how they could catch up. It's kind of a miracle with how bad things have gone that they could even maybe occupy the same tier the A770 did again. And it's a maybe. And now so much talent has left AXG. AXG, I don't even think technically exists anymore. It's been rolled into something
yeah, it's been sort of half dissolved, and half of them were integrated into DCAI, half of them are integrated into, well, I mean, less than half, right? Half of what was cut down to, right, was and yeah, we don't have a dedicated GPU like group, like at a major group level GPU anymore, right? It's just it's sort of been integrated into other major groups like DCAI versus Intel clients, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so, and that's why I think it's imperative they don't try to do more than, again, one dedicated GPU. That's it in the low end at most, because look at all the money NVIDIA's pouring into GPU, and that AMD is, to a lesser extent, but still doing, if you're AI at least. Intel's pouring less and less money into this group. How would they keep up? Right? Like, I'm not being a jerk. Yeah. I'm just saying, like, I'm not even blaming the people there anymore. I'm saying you have less money in personnel. How can they keep up? And to keep trying to do that with a shoestring budget, it just seems like that money should be going to, like, making sure that Intel's cores are competitive, don't you think?
Right, yeah.
Like, I think this damage has been done, guys. I think it's done. I mean, and my concern, even with a 128-bit die, let's say that's all they were to do every 2 years, who's going to buy it? You know, like, I've already leaked that Battlemage doesn't seem like it's going to go into laptops outside of Lunar Lake. So who's going to buy this? I don't get it.
I mean, the only hope would be to price it really competitively, and then the margin return on that would be so low that I don't know. Maybe Intel could try to make a long-term play by positioning their low mid-range discrete graphics. By establishing some sort of market share type of presence that they could work off of in the future, especially as, say, in 5 years, you know, things, if the financials have improved, Intel improved so much so that they can afford to pour more money into GPUs, and maybe in the successive, like, down the line generations, you know, they could try to compete again. But Intel had a legitimate window to enter into GPU market. They missed that. They failed in the sort of goals of executions that they got in too late. They didn't have the right level of expertise and investments. And now, what's the best they could do out of a bad situation, right? That's what sort of the question that the company's executives should be asking. And I think, yeah, continuing, not killing it off completely, continuing to invest in GPUs in like 1 or 2 dies or variants of, and keeping it alive until Intel has the resources to really invest in like 5-7 years. I don't know how many years down the line. I think that's the best option they have at this point. Yeah.
Well, it's the only option. I don't know if it's a a good one. It's the only option because,
well, I mean, they could try to.
No one's going to buy it, man.
You know what I said about the biggest concerns. You know, they might try to chase the dream and, you know, try to.
But no one will buy it. Like, right. If they that's just the only argument I can make for keeping it alive is a hibernation approach, simply because it will be an anchor on the company, a money burning pit every year for 5 years, and they thought they could afford to have the pit be very large. They can't, because no one's going to buy it. So that's why I say 1 die, because that's 1 die you're launching that no one will buy, but at least it's not 3 dies that cost $1,000 or something, right?
Right,
like,
yeah.
So the pit, it's, you know, it's kind of like you're just if you will, you're leaving the pilot light on in a gas fireplace, like, instead of trying to keep that fire going forever when you just don't have enough gas to do that, you know. Right. Then eventually maybe you will, and you can light it up again. But I want to be clear. That's not me saying, I guess I say I hope they do that, but I just hope Intel doesn't go out of business. So if even leaving the pilot light on were to make them go bankrupt, I don't know, don't do it. You know what I mean? Like, I just, yeah. Like, and that almost makes me wonder if actually the best thing they could do is just make a couple tiles each year, and then maybe get to a place where the tile can be attached to a memory controller tile, and that's the dedicated card. That way, at least they're not really making anything more than they already need to make for APUs. I guess they could try that too, but that would be what I would advise at this point, because even a 128-bit card, I don't think anyone's going to buy it, and if it's not a large card, they're probably not going to buy it for AI. But What was, because I think it was a year and a half ago that the last time you were on. Actually, let me check that. Okay, so perfect. So that was over 2 years ago. That was right before, that makes this question much better. That was actually right before Alchemist launched. And I know we talked about the hopes then, but now you've got to see the whole like road for Alchemist from start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what the mood was in the room or the rooms at Intel regarding Alchemist right before it launched, and then how that mood changed or didn't change over the past 2 years?
Oh, it changed a lot. There was a lot of there was a lot of sort of internal marketing, I would say, that the AXG was put sort of plasting on to rest of Intel. And I at one point bought that partially because AXG was such a closed off organization. They didn't share a lot of technical data and things well, the technical data and their progress well, which should have been a huge red flag in the hindsight.
Yeah.
But we sort of had, I don't know, maybe naivety or like, we don't lie to ourselves internally type of, at least that was sort of a trend line of Intel culture for, I mean, that's how it is. And my overall impression of the company culture is like, we don't lie to ourselves, like internally, right? So AXG was the one that sort of, really dishonored that part of core fundamental part of that, and they hid things from us. They said, this is a project. This is a projection. Will beat 3060 Ti and 3070 with our A770, and so there was a lot of hype built up, and then as the products actually came out and as we got to interact with the end products and the market reception, and things just crashed completely internally. And to the credit, the driver team didn't give up, and they certainly made successive iterative improvements in the driver updates month to month, but at the release, it was such an unusable product, and we were able to. They had these like internal marketing events where they had these like Intel GPU events. Hey, come play games or come interact with Intel GPUs, and I got to play games on those systems, and even their cherry pick number of games, I saw so many different little flaws to, I see this, guy next to me having crashes, and yeah.
Do you remember when that event was, though, that you were talking about? Was it like a month before launch, 2 months before launch, where you were seeing crashes and you're like...
It was a month after launch, the official launch, yeah, or so.
Okay, wow. So even after the launch, you were like looking at the marketing and then you were playing it and you're like, this is not what you're describing.
Right, yeah.
And it does seem... So just to make it clear, you would say there is no doubt AXG hid what was going on with ARC from the rest of the company. Like they definitely did.
No doubt at all. Yeah. And we thought, I don't know why it was so unnecessarily secretive, and they were very careful about. They were very unwilling to release a lot of sort of trend lines of what's going on, or the overall progress of the project, or the performance projections, where it is, and where it's projecting to be. A lot of that wasn't communicated to us internally, and that should have been a huge red flag that we missed. It was like, well, it's their very first generation product. It's like there's a naive optimism and blah blah blah. Like what I talked about, before. Yeah.
But you said it's critical. I mean, it's funny. I think people throw around, certainly Pat has, words like critical and necessary, and we need to do whatever. But isn't the only thing that's truly critical to Intel is their core architectures at this point? Because they've failed to keep up in AI. I don't think they can. Again, I want to be clear, like my opinion at this point on Intel GPU is different from before.
AI training, not AI inference. I think
sure, but we'll get to that. I actually partially agree, but like when it comes to GPU, like I want to be clear again, before I just heard it was going so badly that it would bankrupt them if they kept launching stuff. And now my opinion is they have almost gone bankrupt. And the argument that they could keep up in GPU doesn't make sense when you're already 2 gens behind the competition in performance, and the competition is spending 4 times as much as you. It's ridiculous to assume that Intel will ever catch up then. They're not. They can't. That's why spending any more money than they need to keep the lights on so they actually can offer something to NVIDIA and AMD, I think is so silly. But wouldn't you say, though, because of that the only thing critical to Intel now is their CPU cores. I mean, we can talk about AI all we want, but this isn't a land of want anymore. It's need. What does Intel need to be a business? It's their cores. That is what Intel is CPU cores, right?
Right, yeah.
So that's why I worry.
CPUs and peripherals and accelerators, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
Sure. So I think even when it comes to AI, they got to make sure Intel needs to ask itself before it funds any project now, are we sure this will sell? Because we can't launch products that don't sell anymore. Right? Like that. Yeah. That's what I think they got to do. Now, let's talk about Intel and AI a bit. The one thing I think you would say that I also agree on is that eventually it's not going to all be about training. Once you've trained the model's done. It's right. It's then using that model and pruning it and whatever. And that's different hardware. That's what you're saying. Right. Maybe Intel could get into that AI arms race, but because they've missed the first one.
Right. Yeah. When the model is trained by these GPUs and specialized silicons, and as the years come and it's actually proliferated into rest of the world, and now I've seen projections that eventually in the coming years, it's actually the AI inference silicon that would overtake AI training silicon by 2 to 3 times, at least in terms of revenue opportunities in the late 2020s and into the 2030s. And Intel actually has strengths enough there with the CPU integrated accelerators, whether it's NPUs or the accelerators that you've seen on Xeon. We've been doing well. I would almost claim I still need to look into Zen 5 and Turin and how they're doing, and I would say we are at least on top with AMD in AI inference, right, in our CPUs, and continuing to fostering those strengths would have huge opportunities for the company in the coming years. I know it's kind of difficult to think about, well, we might make a huge payoff in 5 years right now, but look what not doing that, imagine all the things that we could have done as a company in 2016 and 2019 that would have had a huge payoff in 8 years that we didn't invest in, right? So I think Intel has a potentially great long-term opportunities here. Yeah.
This piece of content is sponsored by Wondershare Filmora 14, an app with powerful AI editing tools that can clone your voice and then use it to read transcripts for you, or even just change your voice to a different one so you can become multiple characters for your content. For example, here is Hacker Tom reciting part of that 5090 laptop leak I put out recently.
It's been almost 2 years since this channel exclusively leaks the die sizes and even pictures of Lovelace's laptop die configuration.
Additionally, it can add subtitles to videos so you can reach more audiences and do other essential tasks like compound clips, screen recording, and get you started working quicker than ever as well with their pre-made templates. And the best part, it's available on Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android, so you can keep busy no matter what device you have access to in a given moment. And yeah, support Moore's Law by clicking on the link in the description and downloading Filmora 14 for free. Again, literally just clicking the download button once through that link helps the channel a ton, and it costs you nothing. Support Moore's Law is Dead by checking out Wondershare Filmora 14 today. Yeah, I don't know. I think the best argument I can make when I look at like AMD Turin versus like Granite Rapids and such is that it seems like compared to previous AI benchmarks that were important, Intel is not like a fraction of the competition anymore. But at the same time, the smaller and the more Intel's mindshare shrinks, the more AMD's mindshare expands and NVIDIA's remains dominant.
Right.
I don't think NVIDIA's mindshare could get any higher, really. Like the more that this argument that Intel's catching up doesn't really work for me, because you can't like AMD were AMD pile driver to Ty Haswell, a decade ago. You would say, wow, but eventually, that was the last time I think they could have done something like that where it mattered. If then the next generation, what is it, like Skylake comes out and AMD launches something that's 20% weaker, which again, there'd be some people that say that's what Zen 1 was. It's like, no, it wasn't. It crushed multi-threading. But like it doesn't matter anymore. Like as long as the dominant player is dominant, the time for Intel to be 10% behind AMD and defend their market share was the Zen 2 era or Zen 3. But AMD had double the performance.
Right.
And that's why AMD took market share.
Those days where Intel DCAO, at least the engineering side of Intel DCAI, they were in full panic mode. And we pinned our hopes on Granite Rapids.
It doesn't matter if you're, and I don't think they are 10% behind. I think they're more than that. But like if they're 10% behind now, that's worse than if they were 10% behind during Zen 2. If they were 10% behind during Zen 2.
10% behind during Zen 2, we
then AMD wouldn't have taken market share because Intel's dominant. Intel's not as dominant anymore, though. As long as AMD has even a 10% win every gen, that's enough. People are going to keep buying AMD because the shift has already started. Intel needs a big win to matter because they're not who they were before, right? And I that's my concern too with like Granite Rapids and server and AI with Intel. Basically everything they make, is I think Intel is trying to act like, well, look, we're not as behind as we used to be. And it's like, I guess to make an analogy, right, it would be like if there's this long attritional war between two sides, and then one side was like, well, we're only losing battles by 10% now. Yeah, dude, they're near the capital city. Like, no one cares. Like, the time for you to only lose battles by 10% was the beginning of the war. Right. They've already captured half of your country. They can afford to only win by 10% for the rest of the war because they are winning. They have more soldiers left, right? The time to be, so I don't know if you really have anything to say to that, but that's my concern with Intel now, is it just seems like everything we talk about is they're close, right? But NVIDIA's dominant and AMD is almost dominant. Intel can't be close anymore. They need to leapfrog because now they're not in the position where AMD was in 10 years ago. No, I don't think, but they're closer to that than not, I actually kind of think.
Right, yeah. I keep saying to people who are people I know that are working on Diamond Rapids and Nova Lake, you guys this is the last chance. Like, this is really the last chance to save the company as we know it. Otherwise Intel's just never gonna be the same company again. We're gonna see the mindshare collapse. We're gonna see Intel being semi-permanently placed as a second-tier player in the semiconductor industry. And I mean, 15,000, 20,000 people losing their jobs is painful now. It's gonna be like 40% of the company. I see that coming, and I do want to say in more hopeful, optimistic way, it is not too late, but it is getting to that point. They have to hit the nails and retake leadership, both back in client and in servers in 2026 with Nova Lake and with Diamond Rapids. Otherwise, this is done. Yeah.
Doesn't it feel like that's what we said in 2022 when you were on before, and about Meteor Lake and about maybe probably not Alchemist.
No, I mean, I think then I thought, I mean, I certainly expected Meteor Lake to be a better product and Grand Rapids to be a better product than it is how it came out to be. But it's not, I didn't have this like, desperation aura. I don't know. I feel like, okay, we're still a first tier company. We're still the dominant company. I know we're in a bad slump now, but, Meteor Lake, Arrow Lake, and Grand Rapids will come out, then things will return to norm again, I guess, in fundamental sense, right? And now I am at a position where, wow, this company that I spent so many years working hard in, the inventor of first microprocessors, and a company that changed the world back in the 90s and 2000s, and company that arguably, I'm sure people who are on the AMD side, or will argue otherwise. Company that sort of held us computing leadership for decades is about to just collapse on itself, right? That's sort of the possibilities that I see, is fundamentally different. The level of anxiety / hint of desperation that I have, yeah.
Let me ask this question. Mazrio writes in and says, whatever happened to Intel Adamantine? That sounded like such a cool feature for Intel to be adding to their products in the future. But as far as I know, it hasn't materialized in any way. Is that still on the roadmap somewhere, or has it faded into the ether like Royal Core? And I wanted to use this question as also an opportunity to bring up Royal Core, which now we know is just totally canceled. And what you think about that?
One of the big disappointments that I had with both the Meteor Lake and Arrow Lake, they're considered part of the same family with the it's sort of the same family product. One of the big disappointments I had was cancellations of a lot of sort of Halo products in relations to Meteor Lake, Arrow Lake. We originally had Arrow Lake Halo that was
I remember.
I was going to have these 384 execution unit, big graphics tile Battlemage, and 6x16. This MacBook like M4 killer type of deal that's been canceled. On the desktop side, we had A+32 configuration that was canceled. That would have at least given us a clear multi-core leadership, right, in this generation versus Zen 5. Who was that guy, the architect for, I think his name was Randy. Randy and the he was the Adamantine cache architect. We actually invested a lot of resources into developing, testing what Adamantine cache would look like in both the Meteor Lake and Arrow Lake generations, and ultimately decided that the performance benefits on average would come in about mid to high single digits across workloads, if I remember correctly. And
for which one? I'm sorry.
Adamantine cache, yeah, depending on its applications. The executives decided that it was not worth the cost of extra silicon versus validations that are involved, which I thought man, if Intel's trying to make a statement, that we're still leading dominant company, we should have these like Halo products, to really make a statement, right? And I feel like part of the reason why Meteor Lake and Arrow Lake was a disappointment was we sort of beat ourselves almost. We weren't able to. We had these great ideas. We had these things in development that could have made a statement. And we decided, well, let's focus on volume, let's focus on what the largest part of the mainstream market is, like we'll just sell our chips there and get our revenue. And I feel like that over focusing on the long-term mind share of the company and the reputation of the company, I feel like it's a strategical mistake. Yeah.
Like to me, it almost feels like Intel undercorrected by trying to beat NVIDIA and GPU, working on Adamantine, working on all this. I mean, originally, actually, too, Arc was supposed to be like chiplet design, but like all this stuff they were working on that was crazy, all this spending. And now I'm just worried they're overcorrecting and going, not only are we canceling the crazy projects that won't make us money, but we're also going to cancel our core business.
Right.
Like, and I don't understand. Maybe it's, I don't know. I don't understand. I mean, I'm probably going to just repeat things I've said in previous episodes at a certain point, but it's like, I would much prefer Pat cancels a Battlemage dies and Celestial than them cancel the Royal Core project that could have been that like Zen moment of, oh no, not only is Intel back, they just came out of nowhere and destroyed AMD in performance and doing that in, canceling Royal Core, as I leaked, in favor of funding AI that it's dubious they'll be able to spend enough to keep up with NVIDIA. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't know. But with Adamantine, just to put a bow on that. So yeah, you're saying that it didn't quite get to where it needed to be.
Well, if I was an executive making a decision, if I remember correctly, it was about mid to high single digits across workloads. I would have thought it would be worth it, especially in releasing as like a specialty Halo type of product. But that was not the decision. We decided to focus on the volume of the market, where the big like corporate enterprises to average everyday PC consumers, where admittedly that's where the bulk of the revenue still is, right, in terms of the PC market. And cancel some of these Halo products. It is disappointing. Yeah.
Well, and I remember speaking to someone at Intel too, that it was being thrown around. I mean, I think it wasn't me. I mean, I believe I leaked Adamantine first, but someone else leaked a Meteor Lake sample that seemed to be being tested with it, actually. I heard about that, but I think some other leaker actually leaked that 2 years ago. So we know they were thinking, or Intel was thinking, of putting Adamantine on Meteor Lake. And what I was told is it just, well, what you're saying, that like single digits performance lead. Or a benefit. And then it's like, but maybe it'll be better for Arrow Lake or something, and Arrow Lake Halo would benefit. But then I guess they canceled Arrow Lake Halo. And I heard it was going to go, supposedly going to go on. Actually, they wanted to put it on a Battlemage GPU and end of 2023 is what I was told. Clearly that didn't happen. And now they've canceled. So do you think that, I'm just now realizing a question I have, but I really want your opinion on this. Do you think that Arrow Lake Halo was canceled, that top-end Battlemage was canceled, partially at least because Adamantine didn't pan out? Or do you think that they are why we don't see Adamantine, that Arrow Lake Halo was canceled, so it doesn't need Adamantine anymore. Top Battlemage was canceled, so we don't need Adamantine anymore. Do you think that's what could be going on?
Oh, now that you phrase it that way, I think I'm inclined to agree more than I'm not sure. I haven't really thought about specifically why sort of these series of cancellations came about, and that certainly could have to do one with another. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, no one knows for sure. It's probably multiple factors. You'd have to be at the top of the company to know. But it's interesting to think that maybe that's why we haven't seen it, because all of the products that would have benefited the most are canceled.
The Halo products, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Paul Hope writes in and says, how would you rate Pat's leadership and decision making from 1 to 10? You can choose to say no comment if you want to.
I'll give a rating at the end. How about that?
Okay.
He has certainly made substantial improvement in engineering practice and discipline. One of the things I really praised Pat was wider deployment, a more accurate simulation model in the pre-silicon phase. I worked on products before past engineering reformation and after, and the difference was night and day of how closely these pre-silicon simulation models, fundamental feature sets and fundamental behavioral characteristics, they were all there. And what doomed Sapphire Rapids was unclear architectural definitions at the very beginning. Intel projects before Pat always seemed like a more of a revolving as we go type of project. And
like scope creep, scope changes.
Yes, scope creep,
Yeah.
the feature set change, architectural definitions change, and engineers all who are actually on the development side will always have to go back and redevelop things and re-verify things, and it added a lot of work and a lot of fat into the development process that could have been cut if from certainly by a certain point, like say 9 months or a year before the actual silicons start coming out of the fabs. These are the architectural definitions. These are all set. It's well simulated in models. We have fundamental all the feature set and behavioral characteristics there, and this is what we're going to develop. And having that discipline made a huge difference in terms of the development process. That's why, Grand Rapids was, for example, I would say redefined, but it didn't have these horrible delays like Sapphire Rapids did. So I think Pat did a good job there. Another thing I want to give Pat credit for is internal separation between Intel Design and Intel Foundry and treating each other like a separate entity. Because Intel Design used to have this mentality, well, if it doesn't work out, we'll just ask for another mini stepping or half stepping or something like that. And that was I don't know how many stepping Sapphire Rapids had. They had
it was like 15
or so, and some crazy ridiculous number. And if you're gonna ask TSMC for a sample chip, you can't just do that where you be like, well, this was a little off, so here, please make another stepping, right? There will be so much cost business overrun, and TSMC would refuse to do that. And so treating Intel internal foundry like an external foundry, that has helped Intel Design clean up a lot of their sloppiness in the development process. Yeah. So
ultimately, I'd rate Pat Gelsinger about a 6 out of 10. But to be clear, I think that makes him the best of the past 3 CEOs.
Chris Rush writes in and he says, when designing a processor for desktop, do you know how much effort is put into simulating gaming performance compared to other workloads? You know how accurate those gaming simulations are. If you don't have any specific knowledge on this, can you at least talk about how results from simulations are used to drive design decisions in general?
Unfortunately, this is actually one of the areas of recent changes that I'm not necessarily happy about. We actually used to have more of a well-established gaming performance team that on Intel client that simulated, tested, and engaged directly with the game developers and get feedback. And it's one of the divisions that's actually been cut down significantly. Pat consider this not a non-essential work, but is sort of like it's one of the areas where we can cut a lot out of, right? Which I think is also unfortunate. And so although using simulations in driving decisions overall, making a more like complete product from the beginning and on time, that has improved. It was very specific to the gaming and in the gaming and performance in client, that has been cut significantly far as I'm aware.
How does that even work? Like, isn't there just like an FPGA or something where you simulate an idea and it's like, well, we think we'll get this much more floating point or this much more integer, and then from that you extrapolate gaming and just hope it translates? Isn't that pretty much what you do to simulate performance?
Yes, we use FPGAs to simulate. Yeah,
but it is like integer and floating point. It's not like you try to simulate how it would literally run Horizon Zero Dawn, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So he's done a good job of simulating like what exactly if the thing will work, but not as much of with the performance side.
Right. Yeah.
Because there's two different ways to simulate.
Fundamental behaviors, feature set, and et cetera. Yeah.
Okay. How much does this drive design decisions though? That's actually a part of this question, and I think it's interesting that Chris asked. Like you do a simulation and is it this simple? We got this much floating point, this much integer, and then in this other test we get this. Based on that, we think we need to add more cache. Is that a thing? Or does it actually work like that? Or is it just we have these different ways of doing things, and this combination that we simulated seemed to do the best? And that's what we're going to go with? Or is there like a little bit of guess and check along the way after the final decisions are made too?
Yeah, there's a little bit of guess and check on the way after the final decisions are made. And some of these usually... this is actually part of my frustrations with the Intel culture. We simulate things and like, oh, we got this integer performance, this floating point performance, and we generally tend to push that off to next generation, right? Rather than the current generation that this team was focused on, right? So there's a little bit of a delay in generations, and when these things happen and these type of optimizations, ways that we can like optimize performance are discovered, we sort of push that off into integrating that into the next product rather than trying to do so in the current product, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when it comes to simulations, like, you know, all of the hype. Well, I guess there are some people hyping up Zen 5 until the last minute, but like not this channel. But, you know, to put a timeline on it, like, and I don't remember like exactly all the videos I put out and stuff. I think I can safely say that in 22 is when the people I talked to at AMD had the most optimism. And then if I'm remembering correctly, it was like somewhere around late 2023 where people were like, hey, no. Do not buy into this 40% IPC nonsense.
Right, yeah.
And I believe, you know, that would have been, if I remember correctly, too, in 23 is when I was 23. It was the middle, I believe, of 23 and later. I leaked some Cinebench scores of actually Turin, like an early physical Turin. And it seemed to be getting 20% higher in Cinebench if you adjust for clock speed and core count, which it seems like it can get, you know, sometimes. But at the same time, like I was told that it did okay in Cinebench, but we're looking at these final tests here, and it's just not getting the floating point or integer that we were hoping it was. Like I was told that the initial Zen 5 design team, the initial hopes, they wanted 20% IPC minimum, and a lot of them were hoping for 30%. No one thought 40%, by the way. That's insane. And then somewhere around late 23, when they were finalizing everything, they were like, results came in. It's not even close to what we wanted, you know, unfortunately. And there were some people worried they'd only be able to say 10% IPC. Like you would say that kind of matches what you're talking about, right? You design it, you hope, and then you simulate. Early simulations might look good, but later on, final simulations, like with more of the dots, or should I say the holes filled in on what the design looks like. Sometimes it comes back and it's like, oof, not close, right?
Right, yeah. This is actually some of the things that ended up happening on both Meteor Lake and Arrow Lake. We saw more latencies between the tiles than we hoped for. The D2D Phobos connecting in between the different tiles, between CPU and SoC, SoC and IOE, and etc. And reduction, the performance on the nodes itself. We were expecting 5.4 gigahertz top for Meteor Lake. I ended up being 5.1 actual and 6 gigahertz on Arrow Lake, and then ended up being 5.7. I don't have specific knowledge on this, but I heard rumors. We also, because for the Intel client, this was the first major product moving from Intel Foundry to TSMC external foundry, and we were inexperienced in how to get the most out of the node possible. So if one were to ask, like, why is Meteor Lake and Arrow Lake kind of a downer? These three factors: first, CPU product generation going from Intel to TSMC, additional unforeseen latencies between the tiles that are connected by D2D and Phobos, and the reduction of top clock speeds and reduction in performance of node of what we projected versus what it actually turned out to be. Yeah, I saw what you're saying, and I thought it was to be a good sort of leeway into talking about Arrow Lake a bit. So
yeah, that's what I'm going to go to right now. I mean, we're already really talking about it. Just overall, I mean, it's a solid 10% weaker, maybe even 20% in some uses than I expected. Most of the people, really everyone actually I talked to at this point at Intel is very disappointed. But I don't know. What do you like think about it overall in terms of its competitiveness? Because I just put out a live stream where I actually went through Intel slides during it, and I saw some big red flags there. Like, they acted like it was 125 watts. If you check the notes, it had a 250 watt PL1 and PL2. And only one of their tests did they actually run it at 125 watts. The only time they did is when it would have benefited them to make a point. And like, if you actually, I thought this was hilarious. This is like when Intel said that ARC would be on shelves quarter 1, 2022. And they literally just meant on shelves, not in store, not being bought yet. They put in the bottom of their slides CPUs targeting 125 watt TDP. So, but not running at 25 watts, 125 watts, and so we'll have to wait for reviews. But it seems like Arrow Lake may still use more energy than Zen 5. That's kind of what that looks like to me. And they're claiming
I think that's generally an accurate statement. I think it will use more than Zen 5, but it's not ridiculous. I guess the only change is it's not like ridiculously so. But like, if you're going back to Alder Lake, Raptor Lake versus Zen 4 and things like that, is the gap has closed a bit, but it still uses more energy. You said every person at Intel you talk about Arrow Lake, I share the disappointment. I was really disappointed when all the Halo products started being canceled, or 8+32 configuration got canceled. And of course, we still have to see the product release and see the final reviews on that, like you said. But I feel like this is one of the, in hindsight, poor decision of, if we didn't cancel Halo, some of these Arrow Lake Halo products, we could have still saved this generation, but or at least not lead to further erosion in Intel mindshare or its reputation as a company. For example, in the future generations, I should have talked about this when we were talking about Adamantine cache, but in Nova Lake generation, we're calling it ELLC, or extended last level cache. That's basically a Vcache competitor. I hope things like that don't get axed, right? For example, I hope that we sort of learned our lessons of overcorrecting just to focus on what the biggest revenue segment is at the time in it's a revenue market segment looks like, right? Versus, how caring about how Intel is still being seen as a leading company, or does it still have the mindshare and passion of like the end user consumers, right? So
Yeah. I mean, and now, I leaked too that Panther Lake S could be a thing, which I think could be 10 to 20% more efficient, with a single digits better, performance increase. I still kind of find that unlikely to beat Zen 6, but if it launches before Zen 6, maybe that could be a 6-month period, where Intel's actually in the lead on desktop. But I really wondered like the reasons why Arrow Lake Halo and the 8+32 die were canceled, because I've of course heard that it was going to be expensive, that it was having problems, but I almost wonder if some of it is Intel knows that this Meteor Lake platform that's used for Meteor Lake will be used for Arrow Lake, and probably at least on desktop will be used for Panther Lake S, that this is just a platform that is holding back anything you put on it, and so it might be a waste of time to put an 8+32 tile on there. I mean, do you think there's any truth to maybe that? And they know that they just need to hope Nova Lake's good, because overspending on a platform that has latency problems might not make sense.
That is true. But even with some of the problems that we were having between the tiles or underperformance in the nodes, I think with the Halo, we could have at least claimed that we are a leading company. I keep coming back to that. And overcorrecting the point, when we are at a stage in the market share, mind shares position that we're in, further flattening the emotions of what our to our end user consumers, I think is a big strategical mistake.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's any chance, this is another theory I've had that I've just, throwing it out there. Do you think there's any chance that the 8 plus 32 core Arrow Lake might have had the ring bus flaw Raptor Lake has, and that's why it was canceled, or they were worried it would, and if it did, that'd be terrible? Because the ring bus clocks on Arrow Lake are, I'm told, substantially lower than the ring bus clocks on Raptor Lake. And that was a concern of Alder Lake, ring bus clocks being too high, and maybe Intel looked at 8 plus 16 Raptor Lake with high ring bus clocks, shred itself to death. And then they're like, well, if we go to 8 plus 32, it might do it again. Like, do you think there's any chance that was a consideration?
Yeah, I think that's certainly a consideration.
Well, I don't know if it would have had the flaw, if it would just be 8 plus 32, but I gotta wonder if it would have, especially when I look at how low the Arrow Lake ring bus clocks are. Is that, could there have been some last minute underclocking here to make sure it's safe? And also at the same time, they axed the 8 plus 32 because they're like, it would have been too much for the ring bus. I don't know, but I can't help but wonder if that, was a thing.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, you're right on the, like, this is a right, like, line of speculation. After the whole Raptor Lake fiasco, company might wanted to just tone down, basically, pushing the product to the extreme, right? They just might wanted to back away from that, right? Seeing what they saw in Raptor Lake, right? Yeah.
All Jesse wants is for Maurice to play with her more often. But unfortunately, he just does not give out playtime or kisses for as low of a rate as she does. And I think she's just going to have to deal with that. But do you know what you don't have to deal with? Paying too much for Microsoft software if you go to CDkeyoffer.com. This piece of content is sponsored by CDkeyoffer.com and their back to school sale. Whether it's Microsoft operating systems, Office products, or even many of the latest games, CDkeyoffer.com provides PC gamers with a product this community deserves. Amongst endlessly elevating component costs, fair pricing on Microsoft keys is one thing that we at least should get, I think. And the Moore's Law is Dead team has been working with CDkeyoffer.com for a very long time. And that's because they're good to me, good to Dan, good to about a dozen family members of friends of mine that have used their services. And they've been really, really good, most importantly, to the Moore's Law is Dead community. So support this channel by using offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% off Microsoft software, or you can also use Die Shrink to save 3% off everything else on the website like games. Using either of those codes really helps the channel a ton, and it helps save you money. So use those codes Broken Silicon and Die Shrink at CDkeyoffer.com today. All right, let me move on to this here. So we've been dancing around it, but I want to ask you directly. How do you feel about AMD Strix Point and Ryzen 9000? And maybe you can get into Turin eventually too. Like, overall, it's been a really rocky start to Zen 5. But what is your overall opinion of Zen 5? Do you think it gets too much hate or not enough? What do you think?
I believe they're going for server first, and I know server is more of an abstract product for most of the gamers and user consumers. It's cool, on paper, but I'm never gonna use it, right? Type of deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think AMD decided that because of the incoming Granite Rapids, we had to make a server first product, because that's where the biggest market opportunity was, right? I know that there wasn't as big of a jump between Zen 4 and Zen 5, and that disappointed a lot of people. And I looked,
including you, it also disappointed and seemed to underperform what you were expecting, right? As someone who doesn't work at AMD, but you were expecting more, right?
I was expecting more too, as well. I see, some of the between Zen 4 and Zen 5, some of the associativity of the size of the L1 data cache and L2 were changed, and they moved from TSMC 5 nanometer to N4X. So significant enough changes, but it was not it also wasn't a generation where we expect to see in like enormous gains in terms of the client performance, right? So schedulers has changed. I see. Yeah.
They really did change a lot, actually. Like, I've heard people say that they should have called this a refresh or Zen 4 Plus. And it's like, well, no matter what the performance is, if you actually look, this is a new architecture. They really did
architecture. No question about that. Yeah.
It's very odd that, and I spoke to someone at AMD about this, like the Zen 4 team, they say they'd accomplished more than they expected. They were like, we actually managed to get a notable generational IPC uplift in addition to like 20% higher clocks while keeping power from going completely into the stratosphere. I think Zen 4 hit a home run, like overperformed what they thought they could accomplish. And then Zen 5 just didn't. And it's funny, like, I'm not sure what happened with gaming versus server performance, because now AMD is claiming 17% IPC in server workloads and stuff, and 16 average, and then in gaming it's like 3 to 5%. I don't know. When all is said and done. But people can call me a liar if they want to. Go on Reddit. I'm sure you can join those people in the r/AMD. But I'm telling you, people I talked to at AMD, all the way up until like a month before the launch, even, they really expected better gaming performance. And people with physical Turin silicon in 2023 were telling me how there's been big latency improvements, and that this should really benefit gaming. And it just seems like that end of the architecture didn't pan out. It just seems like something went wrong with the memory controller, and they were able to, it seems like for the most part, keep the performance uplifts they were looking for server workloads, but whatever they needed for gaming, I don't know. Maybe at some point things went wrong, and they said, well, we have to make sure the server end performs well. And that's why the gaming one didn't pan out. But I mean, I was told they really thought the gaming performance would be actually larger than what we saw, at least in per clock, but the clock speeds weren't going up, but at least in per clock performance for gaming, they expected a larger uplift than Zen 4.
I mean, what are the two most fundamental variables for gaming performance, right? Is frequency, is core-to-cache latencies, and core-to-core latencies, right? Those three things that sort of are most critical to gaming performance, right? And I guess in that regards, Zen 5 wasn't able to get as much uplift over Zen 4, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Joseph Kelly writes in, he says, hello, Tom, an anonymous Intel engineer. After seeing the release of Zen 5 on server, it makes me wonder if some of Zen 5 issues are related to the I/O die. For instance, the supported memory speeds are higher on server than desktop for the first time ever, I think. I believe it uses the same I/O die that Zen 4 used.
Right. The I/O die was reused from Zen 4.
But that's not true on server. Turin has a new I/O die.
No. Yeah.
So it makes you wonder if a lot of this is actually linked to the I/O die they decided to reuse on desktop, but maybe they got the gains they wanted in server because their new I/O die did a lot of the work there, And in fact, I wonder, like, I want to see Zen 5 Threadripper, like, because that will use the new I/O die as well.
Oh, yeah.
And what if it, like, just crushes desktop and gaming performance? And it's like, oh, well, then that would tell us, well, there you go. Mm-hmm. They thought they could get away with using the same I/O die. Right. That might have been a mistake. It almost, if that's true, by the way, it almost makes you wonder if there should be a Zen 5 Plus that's released
with the updated I/O die, right? Yeah,
it makes you wonder, right? I don't know if you have anything to add to that. It seems like you agree that that's an interesting theory. Mm-hmm. Let me see here. Panic 582D writes, and it says, hello, Tom, an anonymous Intel engineer. What does Intel leadership think of AMD's competitiveness internally, both on desktop and server? Publicly, they've seemed somewhat dismissive. How confident are they actually in their ability to execute on the roadmap, both design and manufacturing side? And finally, what products and features coming down the pipe excite you the most?
this is funny because I think this was a very bottom-up type of development where the rank and file engineers are most concerned about the Intel's competitiveness versus AMD as early as 2017 and 2018, 2019. And I think executives more caught on to that slowly. I think they were more focused on like, well, they have this small market shares. Who cares, or this is not going to be the biggest inhibitors to Intel increasing their revenue or margins, etc. And then I think I think certainly by 2021 and 2022, everyone was sort of on the same page in terms of like, wow, especially on Intel DCAI, wow, they keep beating us year after year. Rome, look at Rome versus Cascade Lake, Milan versus Ice Lake, Genoa versus Sapphire Rapids. But I also want to say it's only very recently where Intel internally talked about competitiveness in multi-dimensional way. What I mean by that is we generally only focus on the overall performance in the most relevant, consumer or consumer / enterprise applications, right? And we left a lot of variables out, like manufacturing costs. Performance per watt was always there, but it was not as emphasized as we would. I mean, certainly I would like back in 2017, 2018. I guess the point is, it's only been like a year where Intel's been talking about competitiveness in this like multi-dimensional, like cost efficiency, product development cycle, and performance. Benchmark performance, application performance, etc. In this way, and I really feel like it's not too late, but it seems like it's very late. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Like they're talking about competitiveness. When you say multidimensional, like NVIDIA, ARM, AMD, being better for being better's sake, not just beating the competition because we decided to, like really looking at the market holistically and going, where do we need to go? Not what thing do we need to do to win by 5% once here. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. We generally thought about competitiveness in a very linear fashion again, especially against AMD. Like, well, if we win by 5-10% here, overall, whatever the cost is, it's fine. We're still the dominant player, and etc. And that mentality has certainly been changing, and I feel like if we started doing what we do now in terms of measuring the product, like multidimensional product competitiveness back in 2016, we would certainly invested a lot more resources into either getting 10 nanometer faster or looking at utilizing external foundries for design to design our products and etc. And that didn't end up happening. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Switching gears a little bit, Chris just writes in again. It says, when I look at how the gaming-focused 7800X3D has dominating do-it-yourself sales in the last year, it seems obvious that consumers value gaming performance more than anything else, at least in do-it-yourself. As an individual, would you agree? How would you say Intel as a whole sees it? And the reason I'm asking this is that it seems strange to me that both AMD and Intel seem happy to launch new processors into the do-it-yourself market, that this year both seem to be pretty modest to negative performance increases for gaming, and then seem surprised when they get bad sales, even though that seems to be all people care about. I have to wonder why this is happening.
I certainly agree that in the DIY market, which is a small portion of the market overall, but it's small in the revenue sense, but it's huge in the mindshare sense, the mindshare reputational sense. Yeah, I think I was almost say it's the most critical factor, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and if I may, I don't know that was necessarily true 10 years ago. I mean, I remember when Zen 1 came out, plenty of reviews were happy to say it loses in gaming by 10 or 20%, but double the cores. But that was at a time when Intel was only selling quad cores still, unless you spent over $1,000 to consumers. And so I think if there's a need for it, people are happy to get excited about core count increases. I just think despite the vocal minority that says we need 48 cores or something on desktop, that most people, now that we're at 16 or more cores, go, we got enough cores. And so if we got enough cores, isn't gaming performance all that would matter? I mean,
right.
you know?
Yeah. I shouldn't talk about my specific employment timeline, but I was really frustrated. I remember being really frustrated until quad core era, where they just kept releasing one generation after with like 2 to 5% performance increases and like same core count. The priorities has changed because there's enough of a multi-performance now for multi-threaded performance now for a vast majority of consumers that are buying these DIY desktop chips, right? I think even back as I would say back in Zen 1 era, gaming performance was certainly important, but sort of the inbuilt frustrations from Intel quad-core era has led to reviewers, consumers focusing more on the, they doubled the core count and there's a huge multi-threaded performance increase, right? And now there's enough of a multi-threaded performance in either of the chip companies. Now they're focusing on the game more. It makes sense, right? Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, I think Zen 5, and we'll see what happens with Arrow Lake sales, but personally, I'm not expecting it to be very good, at least on desktop. I think, and if that happens, especially, both Intel and AMD need to wake up and go, we need to make sure when we launch something, there's a reason to buy it. Or we shouldn't, at a minimum, we shouldn't be surprised if it doesn't sell well. Like Turin's going to sell fantastic, right? I'm sure it will. Yeah. And Strix is selling crazy well from what I hear. So it's not like there's not places to make new CPUs that will get you a lot of money in market share. There are. It's just, Strix got us to the core counts we wanted in an APU, got us to the GPU performance we wanted. It adds, an NPU that's actually pretty dang competent. That makes sense why it's selling well on laptop. Those are things that people want. Server, enough said, more cores, whatever. That's what they want. Right. Then you go to desktop and you go, maybe they should have just not expected Zen 5 to be a big launch. Maybe they should have been like, almost like what Intel used to do, I would say, with like Ivy Bridge and Haswell, which is, yep, it came out. Yep, it's better. Yep, it's pretty much the same price as last gen. And we're not going to make a big deal about it because we know this is going to be bought by people that need to buy a new CPU. It's probably not going to be something that people upgrade to unless they're many years old. And I don't know, unless AMD is going to do something like, I don't know, some magical new feature that we want, anything in gaming or multi-threading right now. I think we're gaming at 200 hertz and we have 12 core 24 thread APUs. Like we have enough threads. It's hard for me to see what would really get this market going because it's funny. I'm sure if Zen 5, had a 32 core model or something, it would be really interesting and there'd be a lot of articles written about it. I'm not sure how many people would buy it. I think most people would still just buy the 8 core, don't you?
Yeah, I think so as well. Yeah.
So I don't even really know where I'm going with what I'm saying. But I think there is a chance here that, in defense of AMD and Intel, I don't know what they can make better because we've come so far in the past 5 years. But against AMD and Intel, if it's not something that people need that they couldn't buy before, that is to say, people couldn't get 16 cores before Zen 2. People didn't have 200 frames per second CPUs before Vcache, at least not usually. Then I don't know why you're trying to up the prices. Like,
right,
I guess Arrow Lake for the most part isn't, even though it uses really expensive stuff. But with Zen 5, I think they really probably should have removed $50 even from what they charge. I think AMD kind of knew because they did launch it for lower launch prices than Zen 4, but I don't think low enough. It really should have just been like a 200, 300, 400, 500 lineup.
AMD does this better where they release it at maybe $50 to $70 more than price MSRP $50 to $70 higher than they should, and then they sort of silently cut it down as like the actual price that you pay for on the market. They do this like price cuts, right?
Behind the scene rebates.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I personally think they should just, do full price cuts halfway through a generation. But I don't know. I've gotten so much pushback from some of my retail sources on why that financially can't happen. But I don't know. They did it 10 years ago and the world didn't explode. So let me pivot to a question here. Now, this question actually comes from the anonymous server engineer. And the person asks, I had spoken recently to an active Intel employee, and we discussed the issues with regards to security on both AMD and Intel. He has stated as an Intel employee to both individuals and businesses to recommend them to AMD as they have the superior product. He also mentioned that the vast majority of the businesses do not use Intel's accelerators and Xeons. This leads me to the question of what can the C-suite do to reorganize and importantly change the culture of Intel's middle management so that Intel can be more responsive to actual customer needs instead of trying to play me to another company innovates a new type of product and then get you to pay for accelerators they don't want. So this also has not worked well for AMD in regards to their GPU division, by the way. AMD is now working on creating their own GPU ecosystem and developing its own group of customers. So yeah, and I do hear that people don't want these accelerators. What do you think about this idea of and I agree, and there's a middle management culture problem at Intel. It's they're all bad, but there's something here where they're like, ooh, we can charge for an accelerator. Or ooh, they want, what people really want? To pay $2,000 for a APU that only has 4 big cores for some reason. There's something where they're like, just give people what they want. And what do you, it sounds like you agree. What do you think needs to change or what should change?
I had an opportunity to work on engineering in the core development and organization that was more external customer facing, where we were interacting with high priority customers of Intel more directly. And I lived in both worlds enough to know that the middle managers in both of those divisions, they work in their own silos, and it was really frustrating. Some of the concerns I had with working directly with external customers, right? And what their concerns were, hey, could you see if you can have these features integrated in this generation and current future generations? And I, of course, I did, I took that to the management of the core development team, and it was shocking at how dismissive of my concerns that I actually collected in working side by side with external customers were, right? Then I went to my manager and it's like, well, what about we release it as this thing, this add-on thing for just this high priority customer, this set of high priority customers. But I feel like, okay, that's a stopgap solutions, and that gives these managers my managers who are on the external customer enabling side a win, right? Because they can say, hey, we have this custom solution here, that we developed, that core development team didn't develop, but we get the credit for it. But it gets lost in the future generation, right? This could have a lot more impact and usage. And if the custom solutions that we're developing were integrated into the core development cycle, right, of future generation products, right? So working these middle management sort of playing their own tribe and silo thing, I think this is some of the things that are hurting Intel a lot. And I think Pat sort of changed this, but even then, the differences that I've seen wasn't as pronounced as so some of the good things I talked about that Pat did, that Pat Gelsinger did in terms of use of simulations and improvement in engineering discipline and practices. So these cultural pockets and the flaws I see, this is something that definitely needs to change. Yeah.
Do you think, when you say these middle managers are siloed and they come up with these things the customer doesn't want, do you think that is it's because they're competing with each other, and so someone comes up with this idea that we're going to license the accelerators, and they're like, and I'll use this to make myself look good because we can make more money doing that. Do you think that's sometimes where ideas like this come from? That's interesting.
They definitely see each other as more of a competition than, AMD is the competition when we are, and I understand that, way Intel had to set up, how middle managements move up to executive suits and things like that. So they basically, in setting up how middle managers get recognized and promoted, they just created bad incentives to have, team A versus team B trying to, make themselves look good and be able to take the most amount of credit, versus what I think would have been better for the company as a whole in its competitiveness and its how the external world sees Intel, right? I think this is bad incentives that are created by cultural, deep and rooted cultural problems at Intel, and it's one of the things that do need to change. Yeah.
So the anonymous server engineer writes in again, and he says, Intel's core strength, I believe, is its legacy customers need low core counts and high single core performance for internal servers that are air-gapped often, even sometimes, and therefore not exposed to the outside world. Meanwhile, AMD focuses on the shared externally accessible cloud that is a high security threat environment. For many businesses, AMD's strength is not just their priority nor our needs, so AMD is not the correct vendor for them, but it is those businesses that Intel is the best match for. What do you see Intel doing to actually cater to those customers AMD is taking instead of chasing after what everyone else does? AMD tried it with Optron and it didn't work well. And right now, what AMD is doing smartly with EPYC, I feel, is expanding the market and then focusing on their core strengths doing so, whereas Intel is focusing on markets that aren't expanding.
I think anonymous server engineer, he raised a valuable point about Intel's core strength in serving businesses that require lower core count and higher single core performance for internal servers. These enterprises, they usually are more focused on like reliability, compatibility, serviceability, and performance-specific applications that do not necessarily need the highest core counts, or per se for the cloud customers, more like advanced security features and etc. So I think Intel has a long-standing history, right, with these customers that's been their backbone. Intel DCAI, their backbone. What Intel's doing specifically, rather than pursuing sort of trends in the broader market, I would say for tailored solutions for these enterprise customers, we have a strong, it's called RAS, reliability, availability, and serviceability. Things like memory, error correcting code, memory support, and vPro technology. I'm kind of reluctant to bring that up because some of the things that blew up there, but vPro technology, Intel definitely has a strong maintaining compatibility and stability and long life cycle products. And I know Intel in the recent generation, there's Sierra Forest and Clearwater Forest that are coming out, but I think the bread and butter of Intel servers are still focusing on enhancements for single-threaded workloads, right? To boost CI/PC, enhance the single-threaded performance, and I wanted to say accelerators, but I don't know. I mean, before the question was brought up, I also heard that accelerators were not as utilized as well as we expect internally. Anyways, the core CPU, Intel's certainly been focused on single-threaded performance and with mid, not the highest core count, but good 48 to 64, that mid-range, right? And Intel's generally good about, I would definitely want to say still, customer support and collaboration. It's even though I just brought up a point hey, I work with external customers and I went to the development team and they just dismissed my concerns, But I think this is a little bit of a different market because I was working with a cloud customer in this particular instance, and the company's bread and butter is more on the enterprise side. So I sort of see this like we have tailored product lines, we have legacy support and compatibility, and we have good enough, even though it is not necessarily being translated to the core development side, strong customer relationships, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny, you talking about their core competency of this like mid-range core counts, but clocking them fast. It does once again make me think of like the Beast Lake Royal Core architecture, and like that would have allowed Intel to just double down on their core strength, which is they have, I don't know what it would have been on server, right? But if they had 6 cores on desktop that could split into 24 cores, I think we can look at Sapphire Rapids right now and say, like, if we assume they were all big cores on desktop, I know Bartlett Lake is supposed to go up to 12, only big cores. And then Emerald Rapids right now it's more comparable to Emerald Rapids. Emerald Rapids was like 64 cores, so it's like 5 times the cores on server. So I think we could assume that if Beast Lake had 6 cores, they would have at least been 32 cores that can split into 128 cores, or maybe 6, something like that would have been at least possible, if not double that. That would have been a really good server chip for your customers.
Make Intel keep Intel's mindshare, and like I keep coming back to that, right? Because that's been my biggest frustrations with the company. Focusing on the revenue meat, and not as focusing on how the company is going to be perceived, in this year and the coming years, right? That's a actual leading computing company, right? So.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that might just be where I want to end the podcast on. I don't know what else to really add to that, but we seem to agree that Royal Core would have at least allowed Intel to double down on what they're good at, while probably making a big comeback in desktop. And I haven't leaked it yet, but I've heard about these other architectures they're working on instead of Royal Core that are far more traditional. I guess I would just hope that the way they organize the server variants would be far more towards the expanding markets that people actually want, than just doubling down on the market share you've had since the 90s. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I mean, unless there's anything else, then I really want to thank you for coming on again. It's always really illuminating when we get to again talk to someone that actually makes the things that we're talking about for hours every week and give us insights. I think you give us very valuable insights into like what was going on with Adamantine and how simulations can not pan out for both Zen 5 and Arrow Lake. Right. Well, you're anonymous, so I'm guessing there's nothing you want to plug, right? There's nothing you need to, but all right. Well, again, thank you for coming on. I'll shill though, if you'll let me. Please, everybody subscribe to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel. Ring the bell button, like this video, share it, comment below for the algorithm, and consider supporting us on Patreon. Supporting us on Patreon. A new Die Shrink just came out. Another one should be coming out this week. The people who are the proper tier on Patreon got to ask free questions for the recent live stream and ask this guest question. So there's all that extra content and interaction for you. If you just $2 a month, $4 a month, it's you'll get access to all that. And otherwise, I don't know. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for listening, and have a good rest of your week.
All right. Yeah.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carmen Cry and Carrie Nosugada as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About side support page in the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carry No Sugata as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong. We love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit. And give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Foles, Z Chits, Daniel D, Aaron Close, Deke, Nicholas Buckner, Jan Rano, Daniel Hyde, GZ Ziggy, MJB1, SNES Chalmers, Jim Ferriero, Valcom Aleb, Jensen Wang, Toka, Gregory S. Acker, Sarcastro, Chris Drick, Compressed AI Blocks, 3DS Boy 08, Hal Puma, Shredbird, Holden Mobley, Sammy Malas, Jordan Simkovic, Julian Leak, The Boz Haas, Jonathan, Franco Frederic, Chrysantine, Jake Dude 23, Jake Martin, Zlicky, Meat and Pork, Nithra Zink, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Travis Gooding, Mats, Suitsu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Greg, Michael McGee, Patty Cakes, Gamers Unite, Amiable Chief, Mark Mitchell, Tommy, Mark Raidmaker, James Anderson, Cole Addict, Jamie Witters, Cameron, Henry Zhang, Wesley Sager, Michelle Bell, Hexapuma, Reginald Ari, Teak Autumn, Mai Sharona, Jeff Sedler, Winstar, Corey Leonard, James I. Raider, Winwang, Little Germany, JSMMH, Shay, Milton, Melodic Warrior, Brett Jones, Chuck Glidden, Mac Daffy, Stephen Dick, Dave Schultz, Austin Haggerty, Justin Bustle, Joe Foot, Brian Scanlon, Hardland, Jason Angima, Joseph Kelly, Slushba, Himsa Gung, Tails 2299, Neil Valverga, Sisyphos 7771, The Forbidden Juice, RB Racer, Brian Wright, AC, Alex Vega, Dr. J Mad, Free D, Michael Cozy, John Swin, Crystal Joe, Elber Gun, Kikum Solarized 80, Thalo 215, Jeffrey Gentleman, Matthew Marlowe, Brian P, Hudat 42, Sprutnik, F, Figef, Higuk, Cornster 671, Penta Winta, Hal Richard, Angel of Cake, Omega Doge, Mr. Tiger, John with Boomstick, Porcelain Oats, Curry King 3, Nix, Mania, Sakosha, Armand Baktura, State Farm Snake, Ryle Chi Bulls, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.